Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Quirk and Quirkless actually hated each other, and always kept fighting so much. Another Quirk war is on the horizon for the first time in 100 years, and Deku grew up hating quirks, and he never let himself get bullied for being quirkless. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air changed at the Amber Bridge. It was a physical thing, a shift in pressure and scent that Izuku Midoriya had learned to navigate by instinct alone. On the Muzdalifa city central side, the air was clean, filtered, smelling faintly of ozone from high-tech advertisements, and the static crackle of 100 minor quirks being used in passing. It was the smell of progress, of power, of the world that celebrated the 80%. Here, on the other side, crossing into the district unofficially known as the Null Zone, the smell was one of reality. It was rust and damp concrete, the sharp tang of cheap industrial cleaner from the textile factories that still employed the quirkless, and the savory sour scent of street food vendors who couldn't afford the licensing fees of Central. It was the smell of humanity, raw and unaugmented. To Izuku, it was the smell of home. He moved with a practiced economy of motion that belied his 14 years. His worn cargo pants were tucked into sturdy, steel-toed boots, the laces triple-knotted. A dark green hood pulled low, obscured his face, but not his vision. His eyes, the same vibrant green as his hoodie, were never still. They swept across the street, cataloging details with the automatic, relentless precision of a security camera. Cracked pavement, spiderwebbing from the third-floor window of the haberdashery. Caused by a sonic quirk, low frequency. Likely a gang turf dispute last week. The city police report would blame gas main issues. They always did. That fire escape on the corner apartment building, the one with the bright blue washing hanging from it, the fourth rung is rusted through. Unsafe for ascent, but a perfect anchor point for a rappelling line. The Hero Patrol is late. Again. Kamui Woods is scheduled for a 4 p.m. pass-through. It's 4:15. He's probably signing autographs for kids in the Central Plaza. The safety of the Null Zone is a secondary objective. Always. His hand tightened around the worn strap of his messenger bag, the corner of the hardback notebook within digging into his ribs. It wasn't a comfort object, it was a weapon. The world was divided into two types of people, those with quirks, and those without. But Izuku knew the true division was between those who had power, and those who had to be smart enough to survive it. The architecture here was a graveyard of pre-quirk ambition. Stark, utilitarian buildings of steel and concrete, now streaked with grime and rain. There were no gleaming glass towers, no statues of All Might with his impossibly perfect smile. The heroes on the faded, peeling billboards here were relics, lesser-known names from a bygone era, advertising products no one bought anymore. The walls, however, were alive. They were the canvas of the quirkless, their silent, defiant scream. Sharp, angry graffiti was everywhere. A stylized zero with a fist punching through it was the most common symbol. Next to it, slogans were scrawled in stark black or defiant red paint. No pride. Quirks are a curse, not a gift. Remember the Sato building. Never forgive. Izuku paused by that last one, his fingers ghosting over the rough texture of the spray paint. The Sato building. A pre-quirk office block that had been demolished 5 years ago. Not by a wrecking crew, but by a fight between the pyrokinetic villain, Char, and the number 10 pro-hero, Endeavor. The building had been full of quirkless workers at a data entry firm. The news reports called their deaths a tragedy, an unavoidable consequence of a necessary battle. The official count was 47 dead. The Null Zone knew it was closer to 60. His father had been one of them. A ghost of a memory, sharp and cold as a shard of glass, pierced the calm of his analysis. The smell of burning plastic and ozone, far stronger and more acrid than anything in Central. The heat pressing in through the apartment window, even from blocks away. His mother Inko, her face a pale mask of terror, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Hisashi? Hisashi, please pick up, please, just be running late. Then, the television. The triumphant, grinning face of a news anchor. A spectacular victory for Endeavor today! While there was significant property damage and some unfortunate collateral loss, the villain Char has been apprehended, and the city is safe once more. collateral loss. That's what his father was. Not a man who loved Katsudon, who taught him how to solder a circuit board, who held him when he was diagnosed quirkless and told him, "Your brain, Nizuku, is the only muscle you'll ever truly need. Make it the strongest one in the world." He wasn't Hisashi Midoriya. He was a statistic. An asterisk in a hero's glorious victory report. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut for a second, pushing the memory down. Grief was a luxury. It softened you. Anger was a tool. It sharpened you. He chose anger. He continued his walk, his pace a little faster, the coiled tension in his shoulders a little tighter. He wasn't the boy his father had known. That boy had cried when the doctor told him he was quirkless. That boy had still, secretly, dreamed of heroes. That boy had died with his father in the flames of the Sato building. The boy who survived was someone else entirely, someone forged in the cold silence that followed. He started training the day after the funeral. While his mother drowned in a quiet, devastating grief, Izuku had poured his own sorrow and rage into a regimen of brutal self-improvement. He ran until his lungs burned, did push-ups until his arms gave out. He devoured books on physics, engineering, chemistry, and martial arts. He started his notebooks, not as a fanboy, but as a strategist. He would never be a victim again. He would be the one who was prepared. His path took him past the Aldera Junior High, the local school that was forced by law to accept both quirked and quirkless students. In practice, it was another dividing line. The classrooms were segregated by ability, the hallways were a minefield, and the teachers turned a blind eye to the daily conflicts. Well. Look what crawled out of the null zone. Izuku didn't need to look up. The voice was as familiar and unwelcome as the smell of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin that accompanied it. He stopped, slowly turning to face Katsuki Bakugo and his two sycophants. Bakugo stood with the arrogant posture of someone who had never known a moment of genuine fear. His spiky ash-blonde hair seemed to crackle with latent energy. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, but Izuku knew they were ready to spark at a moment's notice. The two behind him, Tsubasa and Yuji, flanked him like poorly trained guard dogs, one with extendable fingers and the other with eyes that could slightly magnify his vision. Pathetic, single-trick quirks, but useful for a bully. Still scribbling in that creepy manifesto of yours, Deku? Bakugo sneered. The old nickname had lost its sting long ago. It was supposed to mean useless. Now, when Bakugo said it, it was laced with a different kind of venom, a frustrated, confused anger. Izuku wasn't the cowering, tear-streaked weakling the name was coined for. And that infuriated Bakugo. "It's a journal, Bakugo," Izuku said, his voice level and calm. He kept his body relaxed, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "It requires a vocabulary you'd have to sound out." A vein pulsed in Bakugo's temple. Tsubasa snickered, then silenced himself when Bakugo shot him a glare. "Getting brave, you quirkless freak?" Bakugo took a step forward, a plume of smoke rising from his palm. "You walk around here with that look on your face, like you're better than us, like having a quirk is some kind of disease. You think you're some kind of revolutionary, spouting all that no-pride garbage? I don't think I'm better than you," Izuku replied, his eyes flicking from Bakugo to the alleyway entrance 20 feet to his left. He noted the overflowing dumpster, the loose drain pipe, the fire escape ladder that started 10 feet up. "I know I am. My worth isn't tied to a genetic accident." "Is yours?" That was the line. Izuku had learned precisely which buttons to press. Bakugo's entire identity was built on the foundation of his powerful quirk. He was told from the moment his palms first sparked that he was special, that he was a winner, that he was destined for greatness. Izuku's quiet, unyielding pride in his quirklessness was not just an insult. It was a fundamental contradiction to Bakugo's entire worldview. If the Deku could be strong without a quirk, what did that make Bakugo's gift? "Why, you little!" Bakugo roared, his frustration finally boiling over. He lunged, his right hand coming up, palm sizzling with a series of small explosions. It was his classic opening move, a right hook, not intended to connect, but to disorient with light and sound, followed by a powerful left blast. Predictable. Izuku was already moving. He didn't retreat. He stepped in, under the arc of the explosive feint. The heat washed over his back as he pivoted on his left foot. He grabbed Bakugo's outstretched right arm with both hands, using his opponent's own momentum to spin him around, turning him into a shield. Tsubasa, who had started to move forward, skidded to a halt, his long fingers retracting. Yuji's eyes widened, unable to get a clear line of sight. "Get off me!" Bakugo snarled, trying to wrench his arm free. "You really need to vary your opening," Izuku said, his voice a low murmur near Bakugo's ear. "It's sloppy. A real villain would have taken your arm off." He shoved Bakugo forward, directly at his two lackeys, and used the moment of chaos to sprint for the alleyway. He wasn't trying to win a fight. Fights were for fools. He was executing a tactical disengagement. "I'll kill you!" Bakugo screamed, his fury reaching its zenith. He regained his balance, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. He ignored his friends and charged into the alley after Izuku, his palms now roaring like jet engines. The alley was narrow, claustrophobic. Perfect. It limited Bakugo's mobility and amplified the concussive force of his blasts, making them just as dangerous to him as they were to Izuku. Izuku didn't run in a straight line. He pushed off the graffiti-stained brick wall, vaulting over a pile of sodden cardboard boxes. A blast of superheated air tore through the space he just occupied, turning the cardboard to ash. The shockwave rattled his teeth. He landed in a crouch, his eyes already scanning. The dumpster. The drainpipe. He saw his route. Stand still and die. Bakugo bellowed, firing another blast. This one was wider, a shotgun burst of explosive force designed to catch him even if he dodged. Izuku didn't dodge. He slid, feet first, kicking the rusted metal lid of the dumpster. The heavy lid flew up on its hinges, intercepting the blast with a deafening clang. The force of the explosion ripped the lid from the dumpster and sent it spinning through the air like a deadly frisbee. Bakugo had to duck, his attack momentarily forgotten. That was the opening Izuku needed. He scrambled up the side of the dumpster. His fingers found a purchase on the loose drainpipe. It groaned under his weight but held. He pulled himself up, his boots finding a narrow brick ledge. From there, it was a quick, desperate scramble up to the fire escape. He swung his leg over the railing just as another explosion vaporized the section of drainpipe he'd been clinging to. He was safe, for the moment. He stood on the metal platform, looking down at the fuming Bakugo 10 feet below. Tsubasa and Yuji were now peering hesitantly into the alley, their bravado gone. "Is that all you've got, Bakugo?" Izuku called down, his voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline thrumming through his veins. "All that power, and you can't even hit a stationary target. It's almost sad." Goading him was a risk, but a calculated one. He needed more data. He needed to see Bakugo's rage, to understand its limits, to catalog its patterns. His notebook was useless without accurate information. Bakugo's response was not verbal. He aimed both palms at the ground and detonated a massive, sustained explosion. He flew into the air, a human rocket propelled by his own fury. It was a clumsy, inefficient use of his quirk, but it was fast. Izuku had anticipated this. As Bakugo ascended, Izuku reached into his messenger bag. His fingers closed around a familiar object, a heavily modified work glove, with a flat metal plate on the palm and a cluster of capacitors strapped to the wrist with electrical tape. A creation of his own design, cobbled together from salvaged electronics. He called it the static gauntlet. Bakugo reached the level of the fire escape, his left hand reaching out to grab Izuku while his right crackled, ready for a point-blank blast. Izuku met the grab. He didn't try to block it. He simply slapped his gloved palm against the back of Bakugo's outstretched hand. He pressed the activator switch on the inside of his wrist. There was a sharp snap of discharging electricity. The capacitors dumped their charge in a single, concentrated burst. It wasn't enough to be lethal, but it was more than enough to overwhelm a human nervous system. Bakugo's body seized. His eyes went wide, not with anger, but with pure shock. The muscles in his arm contracted violently, and his quirk sputtered out, the roar of his explosions dying into a pathetic fizzle. His brief flight ended. With a choked cry, he dropped back down to the alley floor, landing in a heap. He wasn't unconscious, but he was stunned, his limbs twitching, the smell of ozone now clinging to him instead of Izuku. Tsubasa and Yuji stared, their mouths agape. They had just witnessed the impossible. The quirkless Deku had not only escaped, he had incapacitated the mighty Bakugo. Izuku didn't linger to gloat. He looked down at his handiwork, his face a mask of cold analysis. Subject is highly susceptible to neuromuscular disruption. Taser-like effects are effective for temporary incapacitation. Note: must increase capacitor charge for subjects with higher body mass or insulating quirks. He turned and began climbing the fire escape, moving with a fluid, confident grace. He paused at the next landing and looked back down. "Tell your master," Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the alley, "that the future isn't going to be decided by how loudly you can pop. It's going to be decided by who's smart enough to be standing when the noise stops." With that, he continued his ascent, disappearing over the edge of the roof. He left behind a humiliated, twitching rival and 2 terrified cronies, the seeds of a new, frightening legend planted in their minds. Back in the sanctuary of his small room, the adrenaline finally began to fade, replaced by a familiar, controlled focus. The room was sparse, almost monastic. A simple bed, a desk covered in tools and half-finished gadgets, and a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf crammed not with manga or fiction, but with textbooks on engineering, anatomy, urban warfare, and sociology. The walls were covered in maps of the city, crisscrossed with lines and notes, written in his own precise, angular handwriting. Red lines indicated pro-hero patrol routes. Blue lines marked the territories of Quirk Street gangs. Green lines were his own, escape routes, vantage points, resource caches he'd hidden throughout the null zone. His mother was out, working her second job cleaning offices in a central skyscraper. A quiet, grueling act of defiance in a world that would have preferred she just disappear. The silence of the apartment was a comfort. Izuku sat at his desk and pulled out his notebook. He flipped past detailed schematics for smoke bombs, past anatomical charts of pro-heroes' sidekicks with their quirk-related weaknesses circled, past chemical formulas for non-lethal irritants. He opened to a new page and clicked his pen. The heading he wrote was simple and direct. Subject: Bakugo Katsuki. Encounter analysis. Date: current date. His pen flew across the page, his writing small and neat. Hostile engagement initiated by subject. Motivation remains consistent. Ideological opposition to null positive stance and perceived personal slight. Subject's tactics are unchanged, relying on intimidation and overwhelming force. Initial attack pattern: right hand explosive feint followed by left hand primary blast. Predictability: 95%. This is a critical vulnerability. Subject telegraphs his intentions, exploited by closing distance, and using his own momentum against him. Environmental awareness low. Subject becomes target fixated, ignoring tactical advantages or disadvantages of the terrain. Narrow alley amplified concussive force, creating hazardous conditions for all parties. He did not account for this. Improvised propulsion, inefficient but effective for short-range vertical movement. High energy consumption. Leaves him vulnerable during ascent and at the apex of his flight. Further study required. Weaknesses exploited. 1. Psychological, prone to rage. Easily goaded into making tactical errors. 2. Tactical, over-reliance on quirk. Lacks sophisticated hand-to-hand combat skills. 3. Physiological, standard human nervous system. Highly susceptible to electrical shock. The static gauntlet, V.2.3, performed at 110% efficiency. Possible to increase amperage for longer incapacitation period. He paused, tapping the pen against the page. He hadn't felt fear during the fight. He hadn't felt anger. He had felt detached. It was a problem he was analyzing, an equation he was solving. Bakugo wasn't a person, he was a variable. A dangerous, explosive variable, but a variable nonetheless. This was what his father had meant. Your brain is a muscle. The quirk world celebrated the power of the body, the power of genetics. They had grown lazy, complacent. They equated strength with ability, power with intelligence. They were wrong. The human mind, when properly honed and applied, was the most dangerous weapon in existence. A quirk could break a wall, but an idea could break the world. He finished his entry, closing the notebook with a soft, definitive thud. He looked at the maps on his wall, at the city laid out before him like a patient on an operating table. The dividing line of the Amber Bridge was just the most obvious symptom of the disease. The sickness ran deep, through the hero agencies that valued PR over people, through the corporations that sold quirk-related products like snake oil, through the government that legislated a new form of systemic bigotry. The world was sick, and the fever was rising. The tension between the quirked and the quirkless had been simmering for a century, ever since the first glowing baby was born. Now, it was beginning to boil. The whispers of a second quirk war were getting louder, moving from the radical fringes to the desperate conversations in the null zone's darkened pubs and community centers. Izuku Midoriya had no interest in being a soldier in that war. Soldiers followed orders. They became collateral damage. He looked at his own reflection in the dark screen of his computer monitor. He saw a boy with a wild mane of green-black hair, freckles scattered across his cheeks like constellations, and eyes that held a chilling, analytical fire. He saw a boy who had refused to be a victim, who had refused to be Deku. He was going to be the man who drew the battle lines. He would be the strategist, the ghost in the machine, the one who understood the enemy better than they understood themselves. He would not be a hero. He would not be a villain. He would be the equalizer. And the fight in the alley was only the first, quiet shot in a war no one else even knew he was planning to wage. The dividing line didn't just run across a bridge. It ran through the heart of society, and Izuku was determined to be the one who finally, irrevocably erased it. The grit line was a scar. It was the messy, stitched-together tissue that separated the pristine body of Muzurifa's city central from the supposedly gangrenous limb of the null zone. It was a no-man's land of a few city blocks where the worlds collided, and the friction was palpable. Here, a high-end boutique selling quirk-activated fashion accessories stood across the street from a pawn shop whose windows were covered in thick metal grates. Hero merchandise stores with bright, smiling decals of All Might were bookended by alleyways marked with the null zone's stark, fist and zero emblem. This was where Izuku Midoriya came to work. He sat on the rooftop of a 5-story apartment building, a place he'd accessed via a rusted maintenance ladder in the back alley. The position gave him a perfect, unobstructed view of the T-junction below, a known hotspot for villain activity and, consequently, hero response. In his hands he held a pair of powerful, second-hand binoculars. On the tar paper roof beside him lay his notebook, open to a fresh page, and a digital stopwatch. Objective: log hero response times to incidents occurring on the grit line. Hypothesis: response time will be significantly slower, EST 30 to 40% delay, compared to incidents of similar threat level originating one block further into Central. Priority will be containment, preventing spread into Central, rather than immediate resolution. He'd been at it for 2 hours, and the afternoon had been disappointingly quiet. A minor purse snatching handled by a beat cop with a mildly adhesive quirk. A public intoxication case involving a man who could change his skin color to a nauseating plaid. Nothing that required a ranked pro-hero. Izuku logged it all with meticulous, dispassionate detail. This was data. This was ammunition. The city's complacency was a weakness he planned to map, inch by painstaking inch. The pro-heroes were a system, and like any system, they had rules, protocols, and exploitable flaws. Their greatest flaw, as far as Izuku could tell, was arrogance. They believed their own press. They believed their power made them infallible. And they believed that some parts of the city, and some of its people, were worth more than others. His father was proof of that. A sudden scream from the street below shattered his concentration. It was followed by a chorus of panicked shouts. Izuku immediately brought the binoculars to his eyes, sweeping the area. He found the source in seconds. A grotesque, amorphous creature made of viscous green sludge was pouring out of a convenience store, dragging a sputtering, thrashing figure with it. Izuku's blood ran cold. Not with fear, but with a sudden, predatory focus. He clicked the stopwatch. The sludge villain was a chaotic mess of fluid dynamics, all churning muck and floating, manic eyes. But the figure trapped within, the spiky ash-blonde hair was unmistakable, even coated in green slime. The furious, Muffled explosions erupting from within the villain's body confirmed it. Katsuki Bakugo. For a fraction of a second, a dark, ugly thought surfaced in Izuku's mind. Good. Let the quirk world choke on its own champion. It was a tempting, simple thought. Bakugo, the symbol of everything Izuku despised, genetic luck, unearned arrogance, casual cruelty, being consumed by another product of their broken society. It was almost poetic. He crushed the thought under the heel of his logic. His personal feelings for Bakugo were irrelevant. This was a public incident. A level 3 or 4 threat. This was a test case for his hypothesis. He focused the binoculars, his hands steady. Bakugo wasn't a passive victim. He was fighting, detonating his quirk in rapid, desperate bursts. But it was useless. The explosions, contained within the sludge, only served to churn the villain's body, making it harder to escape. Bakugo was effectively trapped in a cage of his own making, his greatest asset rendered into a liability. The irony was exquisite. Civilians were scattering, their screams forming a useless background symphony of terror. Within 90 seconds, the first heroes arrived. Izuku noted their names as they appeared. Death Arms, the brawling hero with super strength. Kamui Woods, the young riser with the arboreal quirk. Backdraft, the water-wielding rescue specialist, was already working on crowd control, creating barriers of water to push people back. Izuku's pen began to move. Initial response time, 1 minute 32 seconds. Acceptable for this zone. Team composition, poorly suited for the threat. He watched, his expression grim, as his prediction began to unfold. Death Arms charged in, throwing a powerful punch. His fist sank into the sludge with a wet smack and was nearly caught. The villain was too fluid for blunt force trauma. Ineffective, Izuku wrote. Kamui Wood swung in on a branch. I've got it! Lacquered chain prison! He stopped mid-shout. The entire area was now littered with small fires, started by Bakugo's stray explosions. Using a wood-based quirk here was asking for a 5-alarm blaze. Tactical paralysis. Subject is a fire hazard. The heroes formed a loose perimeter, their expressions shifting from confident determination to frustrated concern. Izuku focused his binoculars on them, trying to read their lips. Can't get a solid grip on him. Death Arms grunted, shaking sludge from his gauntlets. My wood will just burn up, Kamui said, his voice tight. We need someone with a different kind of quirk. We need to contain this. There it was. The word. Contain. Empty Lady arrived then, her massive form striding down the street. She stopped short. I can't get through here. This street is too narrow. I'll do more harm than good. She put her hands on her hips, a giant useless spectator. Izuku felt a familiar, cold anger begin to build in his chest. They weren't trying to save Bakugo. They were managing a problem. They saw a powerful quirk thrashing inside the villain and made an assumption that the boy could hold out. Their primary concern was the environment. The buildings. The street. The invisible line just a block away that separated the grit line from Central proper. He listened intently, catching snippets of their conversation over the din. Keep it from spreading toward them all. Wait for someone with a more suitable quirk. The kid's still fighting, he's buying us time. Buying them time? The cold anger began to simmer, heating into a quiet, focused rage. Bakugo was suffocating. He could see it even from this distance. The explosions were becoming weaker, more sporadic. The boy's desperate, furious struggles were slowing. And these so-called heroes were standing around, treating a human life as a strategic buffer zone. This was the Sato building all over again. A different scale, a different day, but the same rotten, diseased core. The system was designed to protect itself, not the people it claimed to serve. Property values over human lives. A good news cycle over a difficult rescue. Izuku looked at Bakugo, and for the first time, he didn't see his tormentor. He didn't see the arrogant prodigy. He saw a symbol. He saw the entire quirk society in microcosm, powerful, arrogant, and choking on its own self-congratulatory hubris, waiting for a bigger, more powerful hero to come along and solve a problem they should have been able to handle themselves. And he saw the pro-heroes, the system's enforcers, watching it happen with expressions of professional concern, their hands tied by protocol and incompetence. Something inside Izuku snapped. Not loudly, not with a burst of heroic passion, but with the quiet, final click of a switch being thrown. His hypothesis was proven. The data was collected. Now, it was time for an unscheduled variable. He packed his gear in a fluid, practiced motion, his mind already 3 steps ahead. This was not a rescue. This was a statement. He was going to demonstrate, in the most public way possible, the absolute, pathetic failure of their system. He left the rooftop, moving not towards the stairs, but towards the fire escape. He descended with the silent speed of a spider, his boots making no sound on the metal rungs. He hit the alleyway at a run, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. Villain composition, semi-liquid, high viscosity. Central nervous system likely concentrated in the eyes. Hostage is creating internal pressure pockets with his quirk, but this is also depleting his oxygen supply. Hero assets on scene, 1 brute force, 1 environmental hazard, 1 oversized paperweight. Crowd is a factor, used for cover. He emerged from the alley into the chaos of the street. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of slime. Backdraft's water walls hissed on the hot pavement. Izuku kept his head down, his green hoodie a drab bit of camouflage in the panicked crowd. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning not the villain, but the debris field. A fire truck was parked at the edge of the cordon, its crew standing by, waiting for the heroes to give them an all-clear that wasn't coming. On its side, secured by a simple latch, were several large, red fire extinguishers. Perfect. He didn't run blindly. He moved with the crowd, letting its panicked flow carry him closer to the truck. No one paid any attention to a skinny teenager in a hoodie. They were all looking at the spectacle, at the monster, and the heroes. He was invisible. He reached the truck, his fingers working quickly at the latch. It sprang open. He hefted one of the heavy CO2 extinguishers. It was cumbersome, but its potential was immense. He wasn't interested in the foam, or the gas inside as a suppressant. He was interested in the physics. A steel cylinder under immense pressure. A potential projectile. A kinetic force. He ducked behind a parked car, his heart hammering against his ribs, not with fear, but with the high-octane thrill of execution. He rummaged in his messenger bag, his fingers finding his multi-tool. He pulled out the awl, its sharp point gleaming. This was the point of no return. His analysis was over. Izuku broke from cover. For a moment, nobody noticed him. He was just another civilian, a stupid kid running towards the danger instead of away. A few people shouted at him. He ignored them. Hey! Kid! Get back here! It was Death Arms, his attention finally diverted. Izuku didn't slow down. His eyes were locked on the villain. He saw the main weakness he'd identified from the rooftop. The villain's left eye, large and bulbous, was momentarily unobscured as it gloated at the helpless heroes. That was his target. He ran, the heavy canister held low. He wasn't running like a hero. He was running like a soldier crossing open ground, making himself the smallest possible target. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The target, the objective, the result. He was 20 feet away when he acted. He didn't throw the extinguisher. He planted his feet, angled the canister like a small mortar, and drove the point of the awl into the canister's side wall with all the force his wiry frame could muster. The result was instantaneous and violent. With a deafening shriek of escaping gas, the canister became a rocket. The punctured steel ruptured, and the compressed CO2 erupted in a chaotic, explosive decompression. The extinguisher didn't just fly. It tumbled, spinning wildly, propelled by a powerful, unpredictable jet of freezing gas. It wasn't elegant. It was brutal. It was pure, applied physics. The spinning metal projectile, weighing a good 30 pounds and moving at incredible speed, slammed not into the villain's eye, but into the side of its head with a sickening, wet crunch. The impact alone would have been staggering. But the secondary effect was what Izuku had counted on. The sudden, explosive release of CO2 created a massive, opaque white cloud and a disorienting roar of sound. The sludge villain reeled back, its form spasming in shock and pain. Its grip on Bakugo, for a single, crucial second, loosened. That was the opening. Bakugo, running on pure instinct and fury, seized it. He gasped a ragged breath of air from the momentary gap and unleashed the most powerful explosion he had left, a point-blank blast directed straight through the villain's body. The sludge monster detonated from the inside out, splattering the street with foul-smelling green goo. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of the now empty fire extinguisher spinning to a halt on the pavement, and Bakugo's raw, ragged coughing as he collapsed to his knees, covered in filth but alive. For a moment everyone, the crowd, the heroes, Bakugo himself, was frozen in stunned disbelief. They had just witnessed a quirkless teenager with a fire extinguisher accomplish what a team of pro-heroes could not. The spell broke. The heroes, their embarrassment warring with their professionalism, rushed forward. But they didn't go to Izuku. They surrounded Bakugo, helping him to his feet, clapping him on the back. Incredible! What a powerful quirk! You held on in there, kid! Great job! A real hero in the making! They were already rewriting the narrative, spinning the story in a way they understood. The powerful quirk boy had saved himself. The other kid, the one with the hoodie, was a reckless anomaly, a footnote. Izuku stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. He watched them praise the symbol of their own values while completely ignoring the evidence of their failure. The cold rage in his chest solidified into something harder, something more permanent. Contempt. Then, they turned to him. The media was arriving now, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The heroes needed to control the scene. Death Arms stomped over, his face a thunderous mask of official disapproval. What in the hell did you think you were doing, kid? He boomed, his voice dripping with condescension. That was the most reckless, idiotic thing I have ever seen. You're lucky you didn't get yourself and everyone else here killed. Interfering with a hero operation is a serious offense. Kamui Woods came to his side, his wooden arms crossed. We had the situation under control. You're not a hero. You have no training. You're just a liability. Under control? The words echoed in Izuku's mind, so utterly, laughably false that he almost laughed. He looked from their self-righteous faces to the smoldering pavement, to the scattered remains of the villain, to Bakugo, who was now staring at Izuku with a look of profound, infuriated confusion he had never seen on the boy's face before. Izuku lifted his head, and the look in his eyes made Death Arms take an involuntary half-step back. It wasn't the look of a scared, chastened teenager. It was the cold, dead glare of a prosecutor about to deliver a verdict. Under control. Izuku's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a shard of glass. Let's review the facts. Your response time to this incident was 1 minute and 32 seconds. For the next 7 minutes and 46 seconds, you and your colleagues established a perimeter and proceeded to do absolutely nothing. He pointed a finger at Death Arms. Your quirk was ineffective against a fluid opponent. A fact you established in the first 10 seconds, and then failed to adapt to. He swiveled his gaze to Kamui Woods. You correctly identified that your quirk was a fire hazard, and then you became a spectator. You made no attempt to coordinate with Backdraft to mitigate the fire risk. You simply stood down. He gestured vaguely at the space where Empty Lady had been. Your other compatriot was too large to even enter the operational area. Your team was, by every objective measure, tactically impotent. The heroes were stunned into silence. The reporters were scribbling furiously. Izuku wasn't finished. His voice grew stronger, laced with the righteous fury he had held back for so long. You didn't have it under control. You were waiting for a hero with the right quirk to show up and do your job for you. All while a citizen, a child, was suffocating in front of you. You stood there and watched, your primary concern being that the fight might spill over and damage the shopping district. He took a step forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to physically push the larger hero back. I didn't interfere with a hero operation, Izuku spat, the words dripping with venom. There was no hero operation. There was only negligence. Apathy. You are a symbol of a broken system that values property over people, that worships power but has no idea how to use it intelligently. The only reason that boy is alive is because someone without a quirk was willing to do what you were not. Think. The silence that followed was absolute. He had said it all. He had laid their failure bare for everyone to see. He had turned their authority to ash in a dozen sentences. He knew he couldn't stay. In moments, their shock would turn to anger, and they would try to detain him. He had made his statement. Now came the strategic retreat. Without another word, Izuku turned his back on them. It was the ultimate act of defiance, of disrespect. He ignored their sputtering calls for him to stop. He pushed through the gawking reporters, his small frame easily slipping through the gaps. He melted back into the crowd, his green hoodie becoming just another color in the chaotic tapestry of the city. He could feel their eyes on his back. The angry, embarrassed eyes of the heroes. The confused, conflicted eyes of Katsuki Bakugo. The curious, intrigued eyes of the press. He didn't look back. He walked steadily, his pace even, crossing the street and disappearing into the familiar, welcoming shadows of a null-zone alleyway. The sounds of the sirens and the shouting media faded behind him, becoming the noise of a world he no longer belonged to. He was a variable they hadn't accounted for. An anomaly. He had shown them what a quirkless mind could do. He had held a mirror up to their negligence and forced them to look. The image, he knew, was not a heroic one. And as he walked deeper into the concrete canyons of his home turf, he knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. He had thrown a rock at the hornet's nest. Now, he would wait and watch as the swarm began to rise. The walk home was a calculated retreat through a network of alleys and backstreets Izuku knew better than the lines on his own hand. He moved with a quiet, urgent efficiency, his green hoodie pulled low, his face a mask of impenetrable calm. But beneath the surface, his mind was a storm of analysis, processing the aftermath of his public detonation of the pro-hero status quo. Repercussions. The media will require a narrative. The heroes will provide one. Option A. They brand me a delinquent, a reckless quirkless youth endangering the public. This frames them as the sober, authoritative force cleaning up my mess. High probability. Option B. They ignore me entirely, editing the footage to focus solely on Bakugo's heroic last-minute victory. Lower probability. The public saw too much. Option C. They attempt to identify and re-educate me. A dangerous possibility. He felt a ghost of a vibration in his pocket, and pulled out his cheap burner phone. A dozen news alerts were already flooding the screen. He scanned the headlines, a humorless smirk touching his lips. Mysterious vigilante or reckless teen? Uproar at sludge villain incident. Heroes praise explosive Yue hopeful Katsuki Bakugo after dramatic takedown. Quirkless interference. A new urban menace? Option A, with a sprinkle of C. Predictable. They were already controlling the story, framing his calculated intervention as an act of chaotic interference. They were protecting the system. Of course they were. He ducked into the stairwell of his apartment block, the familiar smell of boiled cabbage and damp concrete a strange comfort. He took the stairs two at a time, his mind still racing. His actions had consequences beyond media spin. Bakugo would be insufferable, his pride wounded and his rage stoked to a new, more dangerous level. The teachers at Aldera would receive a bulletin, and he'd likely face suspension or expulsion. And his mother. He pushed the door to their apartment open gently. Inko Midoriya was sitting at their small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea steaming in front of her. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The small television in the corner was on, showing a blurry, zoomed-in image of a boy in a green hoodie turning his back on Death Arms. She looked up as he entered, her large, gentle eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of fear, pride, and profound sadness. "Izuku," she whispered, her voice trembling. He closed the door behind him, the lock clicking shut with a heavy finality. He couldn't lie to her. He couldn't tell her it was a misunderstanding. She was a smart woman. She knew exactly who he was, what he was becoming. "They're calling you a villain," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "I'm not a villain, Mom," he replied, his own voice softer than it had been all day. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her frame was so small, so fragile. "And I'm not a hero. I'm just tired of the way things are. What they said about you, reckless, dangerous." She trailed off, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "But what you did, for that Bakugo boy, after everything he's done to you." Izuku's expression hardened slightly. "I didn't do it for him. He was just a variable. I did it because those heroes were going to let him die, and I couldn't let their incompetence go unchallenged. Inko looked from her son to the television and back again. She saw the ghost of her husband in his fierce, analytical eyes. She saw the same unwavering conviction, the same refusal to accept injustice, and it terrified her. Hisashi's conviction had gotten him killed. She couldn't bear the thought of Izuku following the same path. Be careful, Izuku, she pleaded, her hand covering his. This world, it isn't kind to people who challenge it. Especially people like us. I know, he said, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. That's why I have to be smarter than them. The promise hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken fear. Before either of them could say more, there was a sudden, deafening crash from the alley below their window. It sounded like a dumpster being thrown against the wall. Inko jumped, letting out a small cry. Izuku was instantly on high alert. He moved to the window, peering cautiously through the blinds. His blood ran cold. Standing in the narrow alleyway, illuminated by the setting sun, was an impossibly large man. He was a mountain of muscle with two distinct, blonde tufts of hair that stood up like antennae. Even in the dim light, the iconic red, white, and blue costume was unmistakable. All Might. Ma, Mizuki said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. Stay away from the window. Lock the door after I leave. Izuku, what is it? Who is that? It's the reason everything is broken, he said, grabbing his messenger bag. He's here for me. He didn't wait for her to argue. He was out the door and down the stairs in seconds, his mind a furious tempest. Why here? Why now? Was this a press stunt? An arrest? A threat? Every possibility was a danger. He exited the building through the back, stepping into the alley. The air crackled with a palpable sense of power. All Might stood there, a permanent, blinding smile etched onto his face, his shadowed eyes fixed on Izuku. I am here! He boomed, his voice echoing off the brick walls. Izuku winced. The man was a walking sound cannon. To speak with you, young man. Izuku stopped 20 feet away, planting his feet in a balanced, defensive stance. He said nothing, simply watching, analyzing. The hero was even larger in person, a caricature of strength. His very presence seemed to warp the reality of the grimy alley around him. That was quite a scene you caused back there. All Might continued, his smile unwavering. A foolish, reckless, and dangerous act. You could have been killed. He paused for dramatic effect. But I must admit, it was also heroic. Izuku's lip curled in a sneer. He had expected this. The flattery. The attempt to co-opt his actions into their narrative. I'm not interested in your definition of heroic, Izuku said, his voice flat and cold. What do you want? All Might's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the boy's icy hostility. Straight to the point. I like that. I came to find you, to understand what drove you to such lengths. I saw it in your eyes, young man. The heart of a true hero. You saw a reflection, Izuku shot back. You see what you want to see. You're the symbol of peace. You probably see the heart of a hero in a particularly well-organized filing cabinet. The jab landed. All Might's smile became strained. He seemed to realize that his standard, booming PR persona wasn't working. He let out a sigh, and in a shocking, grotesque transformation, he began to deflate. Steam poured from his body as the mountain of muscle withered away, collapsing in on itself until all that remained was a skeletal, almost ghoulishly thin man with the same blonde hair, now hanging limp around his haggard face. He coughed, and a trickle of blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku didn't gasp. He didn't even flinch. His eyes merely narrowed, his analytical brain processing the new data with chilling speed. Massive muscular transformation quirk. Time-limited or energy-dependent. The steam suggests a significant metabolic cost. The emaciated true form and hemoptysis indicate a severe, chronic internal injury, likely to the respiratory or digestive system. So, the rumors are true. The symbol of peace is a fragile fraud, held together by sheer willpower and good PR. The man, who Izuku now knew was Tashinori Yagi, wiped the blood from his chin with the back of a bony hand. This is my true form, he said, his voice now a quiet, weary rasp. The result of a nasty fight 5 years ago. I can only do the hero thing for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I'm this. He was trying to be vulnerable, to build a bridge of trust. It was a classic interrogation technique, feign weakness to disarm your subject. Izuku wasn't buying it. Why are you showing me this? Izuku asked, his tone still wary, suspicious. Because I need you to understand, Toshinori said, his eyes burning with a desperate sincerity. What you did today, you proved something to me. For years I've said that anyone can be a hero, but I'm not sure I ever truly believed it. Not until today. A hero is someone who moves without thinking when they see someone in danger. Your body moved on its own, didn't it? Izuku almost laughed. It was the most fundamentally incorrect assessment of the situation he could possibly imagine. No, Izuku said bluntly. It didn't. Every single step I took was calculated. I analyzed the hero's incompetence, I identified the villain's weakness, I located a tool, and I formulated a plan to use its physical properties to create a disruption. My body didn't move on its own, my brain moved my body. There's a difference. Toshinori was taken aback. This wasn't the response he was expecting. He had come here to find a worthy successor, a boy with a lion's heart. He had found a tactician with a heart of ice. Still, he had to try. This was his last chance. Be that as it may, Toshinori pressed on, you possess the spirit I have been searching for. Young man, I have come here to offer you a gift. I deem you worthy to inherit my power. He held up a hand, a faint, ethereal glow beginning to coalesce around it. My quirk is called One for All. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, a crystallization of power that stockpiles with each new user. It is the power to save everyone, to truly become the next symbol of peace, and I am offering it to you. The air grew heavy with the weight of his words. For any other quirkless child in the world, this would have been the moment their life began, the fulfillment of an impossible dream, the sky itself opening up to hand them the sun. Izuku Midoriya just stared, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, a slow, cold, and utterly contemptuous smile spread across his face. No, he said. The word was so simple, so absolute, it seemed to stun Toshinori into silence. What? He stammered. Did you hear what I said? I'm offering you the most powerful quirk in the world. I heard you, Izuku said, his smile vanishing, replaced by a glacial fury. And my answer is no. In fact, my answer is hell no. Do you have any idea what you are? What that smile and that power you're so eager to give away truly represent? He took a step forward, and for the first time, the frail-looking boy seemed to loom over the skeletal form of the world's greatest hero. You are the ultimate symbol of oppression, Izuku began, his voice low and trembling with a rage that had been simmering for 5 long years. You aren't a symbol of peace. You are a symbol of complacence. Your overwhelming power, your ridiculous, unwavering smile, it acts like a drug. It lulls society into a stupor. It makes everyone else, from the lowest beat cop to the number 2 hero, lazy and dependent. Why should they strive to be better, to be smarter, when they know that if things get bad enough, All Might will just show up and punch the problem into submission? Toshinori flinched as if struck. That's not, isn't it? Izuku cut him off, his voice rising. Tell me, All Might, where were you 5 years ago, when the villain Char was fighting Endeavor downtown? Where were you when they leveled the Sato building? Toshinori's eyes widened in dawning horror. The Sato building, that was a terrible tragedy. It wasn't a tragedy. Izuku roared, all his carefully constructed controls shattering into a million pieces. A tragedy is a natural disaster. That was negligence. That was a failure of the system you created. My father was in that building. Hisashi Midoriya. A quirkless electrical engineer. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man, doing his job. And your number 10 hero and some C-list pyrokinetic turned his office building into a crematorium. And what did the news say? Unfortunate collateral loss. That's what my father was to you. An asterisk. Tears were streaming down Izuku's face now, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. And where were you? You showed up after. You smiled for the cameras with the mayor, promised to rebuild, and told everyone the city was safe. Your smile isn't a comfort, All Might. It's the face of the tyranny of the gifted. It's the lie that everything is okay, painted over a mountain of corpses that your system created. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. Tashinori was speechless, his face a pale, horrified mask. The boy's grief was so raw, so potent, it was like a physical force. Today, Izuku continued, his voice dropping back to a serrated whisper, today was the same story in miniature. Your professional heroes stood by and watched a boy suffocate because they were incompetent and afraid of damaging property. They were waiting for someone like you. Your system failed. And you want to reward me for showing them up by making me a part of it? By giving me a quirk? He let out a harsh, barking laugh devoid of all humor. You don't get it at all. You're offering me the very sickness I'm trying to fight. You're standing there, a living god of the genetic lottery, telling me that the only way for me to have value, the only way for me to fix things, is to become one of you. To accept the premise that power is something you're given, not something you build. To become another empty, smiling symbol on a lunchbox. He looked Tashinori dead in the eye, his own green eyes burning with a conviction that was absolute. I don't want your power. I don't want your title. I will fix this broken world, but I will do it as Izuku Midoriya. Quirkless. I will do it with my mind, my will, and my two bare hands. I will prove that your entire quirk-obsessed society is built on a foundation of lies. I will not become your puppet. I will become the evidence that you are obsolete. He held the hero's gaze for a second longer, letting the full, crushing weight of his rejection sink in. Then, he turned his back on the symbol of peace, just as he had turned his back on the lesser heroes hours before. Keep your curse, Izuku said over his shoulder. I have work to do. He walked away, leaving a stunned and shattered Tashinori Yagi standing alone in the alleyway, coughing blood onto the grimy pavement. The hero looked down at his own trembling hand, the faint glow of one for all flickering and dying. For the first time in a long and storied career, All Might, the symbol of peace, felt the crushing, absolute weight of defeat. A tyranny of the gifted. Is that what they had become? Was the boy right? The questions echoed in the empty space of his soul, and for the first time, he had no answers. Izuku didn't see the figure watching from the rooftop across the street. No one did. The watcher was a professional, a ghost. They were clad in dark, non-reflective clothing, their face obscured by a gray mask and a pair of polarized goggles. They lowered a high-powered digital monocular, the audio feed from a laser microphone clipped to their ears still faintly buzzing. They hadn't been watching All Might. They had been watching the boy. Their organization had been tracking Izuku Midoriya for months, ever since his name had been flagged by their social media monitoring algorithms for his articulate, incisive, and virulently anti-hero posts on underground forums. They had his school records, his psychological profile, his meticulously documented fights with Bakugo. They knew about his father. They had pegged him as a potential recruit, a promising young mind, but they had not been prepared for this. The watcher replayed the scene in their mind. The boy's cold analysis of All Might's transformation. His utter lack of awe. His systematic, brutal deconstruction of the hero's entire philosophy, and the rejection. That glorious, definitive, ideologically pure rejection. He hadn't just said no to a quirk, he had spat on the very concept, branding it a curse. This boy wasn't just a recruit. He was a messiah in the making. The figure unclipped the microphone, retracting its thin cable. They pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone and pressed a single speed dial button. It connected after one silent, electronic click. Spectre speaking, the watcher said, their voice a calm, gender-neutral monotone. A low, gravelly voice answered from the other end. Report. The subject, Midoriya, exceeded all projections, Spectre stated. Tonight he publicly humiliated 3 pro-heroes and their response protocols at the Grit Line incident. Minutes ago, he was approached directly by All Might. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. All Might himself? What happened? All Might revealed his weakened state and offered the boy his quirk. A tense silence followed. And the boy? Spectre allowed a thin, rare smile to grace their lips, hidden behind the mask. He told the symbol of peace that his smile was the face of tyranny, that his power was a curse, and that he was going to make him obsolete using his own 2 hands. He then turned his back and walked away. The silence on the other end of the line was now one of profound, reverent awe. "He's the one, Kaido," Spectre said, their voice filled with a conviction that mirrored the one they'd just witnessed in the boy. "He's not just angry. He's not just smart. He's a true believer. He's perfect." The voice on the other end, Kaido's voice, was grim and resolute. "Bring him in. It's time to show the boy a real calling." "Understood," Spectre said, and ended the call. They looked down one last time at the alley. All Might was gone. The boy was gone. But something had changed. The first tremor of a true earthquake had just shaken the foundations of their sick society, and Izuku Midoriya was standing at its epicenter. The days following Izuku's confrontation with All Might were a strange, hollow limbo. He existed in the eye of a storm he had created. At school, he was a pariah. The teachers treated him with a mixture of fear and contempt, isolating him at the back of the classroom as if his quirkless defiance was a contagious disease. Bakugo, for his part, was eerily silent. He no longer instigated fights or threw explosive insults. Instead, he would simply watch Izuku with a burning, unreadable intensity, a silent war of confusion and rage raging behind his red eyes. Izuku had broken something in their dynamic, something Bakugo didn't have the words or the worldview to fix. At home, a fragile, unspoken truce had settled between him and his mother. She didn't ask about the symbol of peace who had appeared in their alleyway. He didn't talk about the cold, gnawing certainty that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. They ate their meals in a quiet, shared anxiety, the television perpetually turned off. Izuku felt adrift. His rage had a target, the entire hero-centric society, but it had no vector. He had rejected the hero's world, but what was the alternative? He continued his training, his analysis, pushing himself harder than ever, but it felt like sharpening a sword with no war to fight. He was a weapon without a wielder, a strategist without an army. It was on the 3rd day after the incident that his new path found him. He was in the Null Zone Municipal Library, a forgotten relic of a building that smelled of decaying paper and quiet desperation. It was one of the few places he could think clearly. He was tucked away in a dusty corner of the engineering section, cross-referencing pre-quirk schematics for EMP generators with modern physics textbooks. It was here that she approached him. She moved with a silence that was unnatural, even for a library. One moment the chair opposite him was empty. The next, she was sitting in it, her hands folded neatly on the table. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with short, dark hair cut in a severe, practical style. Her clothes were nondescript, gray slacks, a plain black long-sleeved shirt. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. Her most striking feature was her eyes. They were a pale, intelligent gray, and they saw everything. They were the eyes of a hunter. "Izuku Midoriya," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was a low, even monotone, devoid of inflection. Born July 15th, quirkless. Son of Inko and Hisashi Midoriya, father deceased 5 years ago during the Endeavorchar conflict. You are a difficult young man to get a private word with. Izuku's entire body went rigid. His hand, which had been resting on his notebook, slowly slid down to his messenger bag, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of the static gauntlet tucked inside. Every instinct screamed threat. This wasn't a hero. This wasn't the police. This was something else. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding his system. "You can call me Spectre," she replied, her calm gaze unwavering. "And I'm here because my employers have taken a great interest in your extracurricular activities." She pushed a sleek, black tablet across the table. Izuku hesitated for a second before taking it. The screen lit up, displaying a file with his name at the top. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. It was a dossier, terrifying in its thoroughness. It had transcripts of his anti-hero posts from encrypted forums he thought were secure. It had satellite images of him on rooftops, stopwatch in hand, with timestamps that corresponded to his hero-watching schedule. It had a frame-by-frame tactical breakdown of his fight with Bakugo, complete with notes in the margin that read, "Excellent use of environmental misdirection," and subject demonstrates a natural grasp of asymmetrical engagement. Then he swiped to the next page, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a video file, grainy, long-distance audio, but the voices were clear. It was his conversation with All Might in the alley. Every word. His furious monologue, his absolute rejection. Your smile is the face of the tyranny of the gifted. The words stared back at him from the screen, a perfect transcript. They knew. My colleagues were particularly impressed with that sentiment, Spectre said, her voice still a placid monotone. It shows a level of ideological clarity that is rare. Izuku looked up from the tablet, his mind reeling. The level of surveillance was staggering. This was not a street gang or a petty villain organization. This was something on a completely different level. What is this? What do you want? What we want is the same thing you want, Izuku, she said, leaning forward slightly. A world that isn't defined by the genetic lottery. A world where human ingenuity, intelligence, and will are valued more than a flashy, destructive party trick. She swiped a finger across the tablet from her side of the table, and the screen changed. It now displayed a new file. Title, Hisashi Midoriya. Case file HFM 0477. Status, negligent homicide. Izuku's blood turned to ice. It was a complete investigation into his father's death. It contained internal police reports he had never seen, leaked documents from the Hero Public Safety Commission, and sworn affidavits from other quirkless survivors who had been silenced with non-disclosure agreements and paltry settlements. The official story was a lie. The report detailed how Endeavor had ignored standard evacuation protocols, using a wide-area fire attack in a civilian zone that directly compromised the building's structural integrity. It showed that the hero support teams had quirk-based fire suppressants that could have saved lives, but they were held back for 3 critical minutes while the camera crews got into position for Endeavor's victory shot. It was worse than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just negligence. It was murder for the sake of good PR. We believe in the truth, Spectre said softly, seeing the raw, shattering pain on his face. And the truth is that the system you hate is even more rotten than you know. We are the ones willing to cut out the rot. Izuku finally tore his eyes away from the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the tablet. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. But beneath it, the cold, hard rage was being forged into something new. Purpose. Who, he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, is we? Spectre's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. We are the Humanity First movement. And we would like to offer you a job. The entrance to their world was hidden in plain sight. Spectre led him to a failing electronics repair shop in the deepest, most dilapidated corner of the null zone. The windows were grimy, the sign was faded, and a flickering closed sign hung in the door. Inside, a stooped, elderly man sat behind a counter, meticulously soldering a circuit board. He looked up as they entered, gave Spectre a curt nod, and then his eyes fell on Izuku. There was a flicker of recognition, of appraisal. Spectre led Izuku past the counter to a back room filled with shelves of dusty, forgotten television sets and radios. She stopped in front of a heavy-duty industrial shelving unit. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, pressing 3 specific rivet heads on the steel frame in a precise sequence. There was a low hiss of pneumatics. The entire shelving unit swung inwards, revealing not a brick wall, but a dark, cavernous opening and a stark, industrial elevator. After you, Izuku, Spectre said. Izuku stepped across the threshold, leaving the world he knew behind. The elevator ride was long and silent, a slow, deep descent into the earth. The air grew cooler, cleaner, smelling of filtered circulation, machine oil, and ozone. It was the smell of a self-contained world. When the doors opened, Izuku's breath hitched. He wasn't prepared for this. He had expected a bunker, a cramped, dimly lit hideout. This was a city. They were standing on a high gantry overlooking a massive, multi-level cavern. It was brilliantly lit by clean, white LED panels, revealing a space that was teeming with organized, purposeful activity. Below them, dozens of men and women in practical gray jumpsuits moved with quiet efficiency. It was a beehive of quirkless ingenuity, a testament to what humanity could achieve when it was pushed to the brink. Welcome to the Forge, Spectre said, her voice tinged with the first hint of genuine pride he'd heard from her. She led him down a flight of metal stairs, and the sheer scale of the operation unfolded around him. To his left was a vast workshop, larger than any support company facility he had ever seen on TV. Engineers and technicians hunched over workbenches, sparks flying from welding torches. He saw them assembling sleek, black armor, calibrating unfamiliar-looking rifles that hummed with stored energy, and fine-tuning spider-like drones. On one table, a team was working on a larger version of his own static gauntlet, its capacitors the size of his fist. They weren't just cobbling together tech, they were innovating, weaponizing the laws of physics itself. To his right, behind thick panes of reinforced glass, was a pristine medical bay. Doctors and nurses moved between beds, checking monitors and changing dressings. It was cleaner and better equipped than the public hospital that served the null zone. This was a community that took care of its own, a stark contrast to the heroes who had left his father to burn. They walked past a firing range where soldiers were practicing with silent, compressed-air projectile weapons, and a gymnasium where men and women were engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat training, their movements precise and deadly. But it was the room at the very center of the cavern that drew his complete attention. The command center. Inside, a group of people stood around a large, holographic table displaying a shimmering, three-dimensional map of Muzidifu. Red and blue icons pulsed across the map: hero patrol routes, police precincts, gang territories. Strategists were pointing and gesturing, planning, coordinating. They were fighting a war in the shadows, and this was their nerve center. This wasn't just a resistance group. It was a government in exile. An army in waiting. Spectre led him to a heavy steel door at the far end of the command center, and knocked twice. A deep, gravelly voice from within said, "Enter." The office was Spartan, functional. The walls were bare concrete, adorned only with more maps and tactical charts. A simple metal desk sat in the center, and behind it stood a man who commanded the room with his mere presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped black hair beginning to gray at the temples. His face was a roadmap of past battles. A thick, puckered scar ran across his throat, a grim, white line that disappeared beneath the collar of his simple black shirt. It was the kind of scar left by a cutting or heat quirk, a killing blow that had somehow failed. His eyes, however, were what held Izuku's attention. They were a deep, intelligent brown, filled with a weary fire and an unshakable conviction. This was a man who had seen the worst of the world and had decided to burn it down to build something better. "Izuku Midoriya," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "I am Kaido. It is a pleasure to finally meet the young man who made All Might blink." He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Izuku sat, his mind still trying to process the scale of everything he had just seen. Spectre took up a silent position by the door. "Spectre has shown you what we know about you," Kaido began, sitting down opposite him. "Now, I will show you who we are." The Humanity First movement was founded by the survivors of the First Quirk Wars, the ones who saw the writing on the wall. They knew that a society that defines a person's worth by their genetic abilities is a society destined for self-destruction. For decades, we have worked in the shadows, gathering resources, recruiting those who have been chewed up and spat out by the hero system, and waiting. He leaned forward, his scarred hands resting on the desk. "We are not thugs, Izuku. We are not villains seeking chaos. We are liberators. We are doctors, engineers, soldiers, strategists, teachers. We are the 20% that this world decided was disposable. And we have decided to fight back." Kaido's gaze was intense, hypnotic. "I've read your file. I know about your father. Hisashi Midoriya was not the first casualty of the hero's arrogance, and he won't be the last. Not unless something changes, drastically." "What is it you want to change?" Izuku asked, finding his voice. "What is your goal?" "Equality," Kaido said, the word landing with the weight of a hammer blow. "True equality. We don't seek to exterminate the quirked. That would make us no better than them. We seek to regulate. To neutralize. To create a world where a quirk is no more significant than being left-handed or having blue eyes. A tool, and nothing more. We want to dismantle the entire hero-industrial complex. The schools that breed child soldiers, the agencies that run on fame and merchandising, the commission that covers up their crimes. We want a world governed by law, not by power." He paused, his eyes searching Izuku's, gauging his reaction. "We tried peaceful means. We tried protests, political action, lobbying. But peaceful protest is a luxury for those who already have a voice. They branded us as terrorists, as quirk-hating bigots. They used their heroes to crush our rallies. They taught us a valuable lesson. You cannot reason with a system that profits from your subjugation. You can only tear it down. This was it. This was everything Izuku had been thinking, everything he had been feeling, distilled into a coherent, actionable philosophy. It was the manifesto he had been subconsciously writing in his notebooks for years. Why me? Izuku asked, the last piece of the puzzle. I'm just a kid. Kaido smiled, a grim, tired expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. You are not just a kid. You are a symbol of what we are fighting for. You are proof that a quirkless mind can outthink a team of pro-heroes. You stood in the face of their God Emperor, All Might, and you refused his poisoned gift. You possess an analytical mind that our strategists envy, and an ideological conviction that our oldest veterans respect. You are everything this movement needs. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping beside Izuku's chair. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on his shoulder. We don't want to hand you a rifle and put you on the front lines, Izuku. We have soldiers for that. We are offering you a place at the heart of this revolution. We will give you access to our workshops, our intelligence, our resources. We want you to help us design the weapons that will level the playing field. We want you to help our strategists find the cracks in the hero's armor. We want you to become the architect of a better world. Kaido leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We want to give you what they never could. A purpose. A platform. A family. A chance to get justice for your father, and for every other victim of this rotten world. The offer hung in the air, a tangible thing. It was everything he had ever wanted. A way to fight back. A way to use his intelligence to make a real difference. An end to the loneliness, the feeling of being a one-man army against the world. He looked past Kaido, through the open door to the command center, at the holographic map of the city. He saw the red icons of the heroes, no longer as an unstoppable force, but as targets on a board. He saw the null zone, not as a ghetto, but as a fortress. He looked back at Kaido, at the scar on his neck, at the unshakable certainty in his eyes. This was real. This was a path forward. He thought of his father, of the collateral damage report. He thought of All Might's empty smile and his unwanted offer. There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. He had been wandering in the dark, and someone had just handed him a torch. Izuku stood up, his small frame seeming to gain a new, unshakable solidity. He met Kaido's gaze, and for the first time, the leader of the Humanity First movement saw not a brilliant, angry boy, but a future commander. When do I start? Izuku asked. A slow, genuine smile finally broke across Kaido's scarred face. It was the smile of a man who had just found his most important weapon. Welcome to the revolution, Izuku Midoriya, Kaido said, clapping him on the shoulder. Your real training begins tomorrow. As Izuku looked out over the buzzing, subterranean world of the forge, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him for the first time in 5 years. The anger was still there, a cold, hard pilot light in his soul. But it was no longer a wild, directionless inferno. It was now focused, contained, and ready to be aimed. He was no longer adrift. He had a cause. He had a calling. He was home. The forge did not sleep. It was a self-contained world operating on its own time, a 24-hour cycle of creation, preparation, and quiet, simmering revolution. For Izuku Midoriya, it was less a new home and more a crucible. The moment he accepted Kaido's offer, the aimless anger of his youth was stripped away, leaving only the raw, high-grade steel of his intellect and will. The Humanity First movement didn't coddle him. They immediately set about the task of hammering that steel into a weapon. His life became a grueling, meticulously scheduled regimen that pushed him to the absolute limits of his physical and mental endurance. His day began at 0500 in the stark, minimalist barracks he now shared with 3 other young recruits. There was no gentle awakening. The overhead lights simply flickered on, stark and unforgiving, and the voice of their training sergeant, a grim, wiry woman named Hannah, would crackle over the intercom. On your feet. The world didn't get any fairer while you were dreaming. The first 2 hours were pure, brutal physical conditioning. Hannah was a veteran of a dozen shadow wars, her body a tapestry of scars, each one a lesson she was determined to impart. She didn't believe in quirks, she believed in the immutable laws of physiology and pain. The gifted rely on their crutch. She would bark, circling the recruits as they held a punishing plank position, their muscles screaming. They get lazy. They forget what a real body can do. We will not make that mistake. Your body is the first weapon you will ever own. Keep it sharp. Izuku, initially the scrawniest of the new recruits, was driven by a cold, analytical fury. Every push-up was a blow against the memory of Death Arm's condescending glare. Every mile he ran on the underground track was a step further away from the helpless boy who had lost his father. He didn't just endure the training, he dissected it. He studied the biomechanics of each exercise, optimizing his form for maximum efficiency. He learned to control his breathing, to push past the burn, to treat pain as just another data point to be analyzed and overcome. Within weeks, the softness of his civilian life was burned away. Lean, hard muscle began to define his frame. His movements, once quick but unrefined, became economical and precise. He learned to fall, to roll, to absorb impact. He was no longer just a quick-witted boy who could win a street fight through cleverness. He was becoming a disciplined combatant. After conditioning came the part of the day Izuku truly craved, his apprenticeship in the workshop. His mentor was a man named Kenji, the HFM's chief technician. Kenji was a bitter, brilliant genius in his late 50s, with oil permanently stained under his fingernails and a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. He had once been a rising star at Detonarat, the famous support gear company, until his quirkless status became a political liability for a corporation marketing products exclusively to the gifted. They had fired him, citing lack of innovative synergy. Kenji had been nursing a grudge against the entire hero industrial complex ever since. Forget everything those preening peacocks on TV tell you about support gear, Kenji grumbled on Izuku's first day, thrusting a complex schematic into his hands. Hero gear is designed to be flashy. It's loud, it's colorful, it's made to sell toys. Our gear, he said, tapping a finger on a design for a silent, grappling line launcher, is designed to do one thing: work. No wasted energy, no light shows. Just pure, brutal efficiency. Under Kenji's abrasive tutelage, Izuku flourished. The theoretical knowledge he had devoured in the Null Zone library was now given a practical, dangerous application. He learned to weld, to machine parts with microscopic precision, to solder circuit boards so fine it was like performing surgery on a microchip. Kenji didn't teach him by rote, he challenged him. The pro-hero edge shot can fold his body thinner than paper, Kenji would say, tossing a block of unformed carbon fiber composite onto Izuku's workbench. How do you contain him in a 10x10 room without a quirk? You have 3 hours. Go. Izuku's mind would ignite. He would sketch, calculate, and fabricate. He developed a concept for a microaerosol dispenser that could fill a room with a fast-hardening, electrically charged epoxy resin. The thin strands would be nearly invisible, but would cling to any surface, creating an inescapable, three-dimensional web that would ensnare Edgeshot's paper-thin form and deliver a non-lethal paralytic shock. Kenji would look at the prototype, grunt, and point out 3 structural flaws and a potential power supply issue before concluding, it's a clumsy idea. But it's not stupid. Build it again. Make it smaller. This was the rhythm of his life. Breaking his body down in the morning with Hannah, and building his mind up in the afternoon with Kenji. In the evenings, his time was his own, but he never rested. He would spend hours in the HFM's vast digital archive, a treasure trove of pirated data and classified information that made his old notebooks look like a child's scribbles. He devoured everything. He studied the fighting styles of every registered pro-hero in Japan, cross-referencing amateur footage with leaked police reports to identify weaknesses the hero's PR teams worked so hard to conceal. He learned that Endeavor's flames burned hottest on his left side, but he was also more susceptible to overheating and vision impairment from that same side. He discovered that best genist control over fibers was weakest against synthetic polymers, a detail buried in a single footnote of an obscure textile industry report. He memorized the architectural blueprints of every major hero agency in the city. He learned the response times and patrol routes of the police, He studied the psychology of crowd control and the principles of urban guerrilla warfare. His brain, the muscle his father had told him to train, was becoming a weapon of terrifying power and scope. After 6 months in the forge, Kaido summoned him back to his office. Izuku entered the room and stood at attention, his posture now straight and sure. The boy who had walked in half a year ago was gone, replaced by a hardened, focused young man. "The council and I have been reviewing your progress," Kaido said, his expression serious. "Hana says you have the physical endurance of a soldier twice your age. Kenji complains that you're going to make him obsolete within a year. And our strategists are already incorporating your hero vulnerability analyses into our field manuals. You have exceeded all our expectations, Izuku. I'm here to serve the movement," Izuku replied, his voice a calm, steady baritone, deeper than it had been. "Good," Kaido said. "Because your apprenticeship is over. It's time for you to build your own arsenal. You're being assigned a priority project. Codename Deku." Izuku's eyes widened slightly at the use of the old, hated nickname. Kaido saw the reaction and smiled grimly. "We're reclaiming that word, Izuku. The world used it to mean useless. You are going to redefine it. You are going to make it a name that the heroes learn to fear. When they see you, when they hear that name, they will know that their time is over. You will be our proof of concept. Our living symbol of quirkless power. Now what do you need?" A fire ignited in Izuku's eyes. This was the moment he had been working towards. He had spent months analyzing, learning, and theorizing. Now, it was time to create. He spent the next 2 months in a private workshop, a space Kenji had grudgingly cleared for him. It became his sanctuary and his laboratory. He barely ate, barely slept. He was a man possessed, fueled by caffeine, conviction, and 5 years of repressed rage. He was not designing a hero costume. He was forging a suit of armor, a mobile weapon system. The core of the suit was a dark, forest green bodysuit made from a triple-weave, non-Newtonian fluid-laced polymer. It was flexible and lightweight, allowing for maximum mobility, but would instantly harden upon impact, capable of distributing the kinetic force of a blow from a low-level strength quirk. Over this, he layered plates of a lightweight, matte black carbon ceramic composite, covering his torso, shins, and forearms. The design was angular and aggressive, breaking up the human silhouette. It was designed for urban camouflage, for blending into the shadows of the city he knew so well. The mask was his masterpiece. It wasn't the grinning, friendly face of a hero. It was an impersonal, terrifying visage of black metal and polarized lenses. A full-face respirator was built into the lower half, capable of filtering out toxins and smoke, while also containing a voice modulator. His voice would not be that of a 14-year-old boy. It would be a cold, synthesized rasp, stripped of all emotion. The lenses were equipped with thermal and night vision modes, and a heads-up display that could feed him tactical data in real time. But the suit was just the shell. The true genius was in the integrated systems, the arsenal he built from scratch. The grappling system, he rejected the idea of a single, bulky launcher. Instead, he built 4 smaller, high-tension wire launchers, 2 mounted on his gauntlets, and 2 on his belt at the small of his back. They were powered by compressed gas cartridges and could be fired independently, allowing for complex, 3-dimensional movement through the urban canyons of the city. He could swing, rappel, or even create tripwires on the fly. He spent weeks in the training gym, mastering the system until moving through the air was as natural as walking. The arsenal of misdirection. Izuku knew he couldn't win a direct fight against most high-tier heroes. His goal was never to overpower, but to disorient, disable, and control the battlefield. EMP grenades, small, throwable discs that, upon impact, would release a localized electromagnetic pulse. Ineffective against most biological quirks, but devastating to heroes who relied on communication systems, cybernetic enhancements, or high-tech support gear. Acoustic emitters. Another set of discs that could be thrown or planted. Once activated, they would emit a high-frequency, multi-decibel sonic assault. To the unprotected ear, it was agonizing, capable of inducing vertigo, nausea, and disorientation. Izuku's helmet contained inertial dampeners and sonic baffles, making him immune. Smoke and gas pellets. He developed a variety of small, pressure-activated pellets. standard high-density smoke for cover. A mild, fast-acting paralytic gas for disabling opponents in enclosed spaces. A slick, polymer-based foam that could make surfaces impossibly slippery. The gauntlets. The old static gauntlet was retired, replaced by a far more sophisticated design. The new gauntlets were reinforced for blocking and striking. The right gauntlet housed an upgraded stun charge system, capable of delivering a variable voltage shock, from a light jolt to a debilitating incapacitating blow. The left gauntlet was his analytical tool. The fingertips contained a suite of microsensors that could analyze material composition, detect trace energy signatures, and interface with computer systems. The boots. The steel-toed boots from his civilian life were replaced with reinforced combat boots featuring magnetic soles. With the press of a button, he could anchor himself to any ferrous metal surface, allowing him to scale walls or fight from unexpected angles. He built everything himself. He machined every gear, soldered every connection, wrote every line of code for the HUD's operating system. Kenji would occasionally enter the workshop, look over Izuku's shoulder, grunt something that sounded vaguely like approval, and leave a tray of nutrient paste and a bottle of water on the workbench. It was the closest the old man ever came to expressing pride. Finally, the day came. Izuku stood before a full-length mirror in his workshop, fully kitted out for the first time. The boy was gone. In his place stood a figure of chilling, purposeful menace. The dark green and black suit absorbed the light. The helmet, with its blank, insect-like lenses, stared back at him, devoid of humanity. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a null point, a walking negation of the quirk-based world. He activated the voice modulator. System diagnostics, he said. The voice that came out was a low, synthesized rasp, completely unrecognizable. A series of green text scrolled across the inside of his lenses. Systems, online. Power, 100%. Weapons standby. HUD nominal. He clenched his fists, the reinforced servos and the gauntlets whining softly. He felt powerful. But it wasn't the unearned, genetic power of the gifted. It was a power he had earned. Every piece of his suit, every function, was a product of his own intellect, his own pain, his own sweat and blood. This was true strength. Kaito and Hana were waiting for him in the main training hall, a massive chamber that could be reconfigured to simulate any number of urban environments. Impressive, Kaito said, his eyes sweeping over the finished suit. You look the part. But looking the part isn't enough. Hana stood with her arms crossed, her expression as hard as granite. The final test, recruit. You versus us. From the shadows of the training hall, a dozen HFM soldiers emerged. They were the elite, Hana's best. They were armed with training rifles and clad in the same gray jumpsuits they all wore. Objective is simple, Hana stated, her voice echoing in the vast space. Take us all down. Non-lethal takedowns only. You have 5 minutes. The simulation begins now. Before she had even finished the sentence, the lights in the training hall went out, plunging the room into absolute, disorienting blackness. For the soldiers, it was a sudden handicap. For Izuku, it was home turf. He immediately switched his visor to thermal vision. The room lit up in a ghostly tableau of blues, greens, and reds. The 12 soldiers were spreading out, forming a search pattern. Hana and Kaito were moving towards the back wall, observing. They were all bright red heat signatures in the cold darkness. He didn't make a sound. He fired a grappling line into the high rafters, the compressed gas making only a soft pft. He ascended into the darkness, a silent predator. From his perch, he had a perfect view of the entire field. Analysis, 12 hostiles, standard search grid. Inexperienced with fighting a vertical opponent. Their focus is on the ground level. Exploit this. He dropped 2 acoustic emitters into the center of the room. They landed without a sound. Then, from a pouch on his belt, he took a handful of small, rubber pellets. He threw them in a wide arc towards the far corner of the room. They clattered against the metal wall, a sudden, sharp noise in the oppressive silence. As one, the soldiers turned towards the sound, raising their rifles. It was a classic misdirection, and they fell for it perfectly. Izuku activated the acoustic emitters. A high-frequency shriek, pitched just at the edge of human hearing, filled the room. It wasn't just loud, It was physically painful. Through his thermal vision, Izuku saw the soldiers recoil. Their hands flew to their heads. Their search pattern broke. They were disoriented, their senses compromised. That was his opening. He dropped from the rafters, his descent slowed by a controlled line from his grapple. He landed as silently as a cat behind two of the soldiers. A precisely aimed chop to the back of the neck for one, a sweep of the legs and a disabling shock from his gauntlet for the other. 2 down. He melted back into the shadows, a ghost in their midst. He used the chaos caused by the sonic assault, moving from one disoriented soldier to the next. He wasn't fighting them, he was dismantling them. A tripwire made from his grappling line sent 3 of them sprawling. A smoke pellet plunged their immediate area into a thick, choking fog, blinding them even if they had night vision. He moved through the smoke like a phantom, his respirator making him immune, his visor cutting through the haze. 3 more takedowns, 5 down. 7 to go. They were starting to adapt, forming a tight back-to-back circle. New problem. Defensive posture. Direct assault is inefficient. Izuku climbed the wall using his magnetic boots, moving across the ceiling until he was directly above them. He dropped an EMP grenade into their midst. The disc clattered on the floor, and a wave of blue energy washed over them. The red dot sights on their training rifles flickered and died. Their comms crackled with static and went silent. He had isolated them. Now, he would break them. He dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch right in the center of their circle. Before they could react, he activated the stun charge on his gauntlet, slamming his palm into the conductive metal floor. A visible arc of blue electricity shot outwards, connecting with the soldiers' boots. All 7 remaining men seized up, their muscles locking, and collapsed to the floor, twitching. Silence returned to the room. Izuku stood up, surveying his handiwork. 12 hostiles neutralized. He checked the timer on his HUD. Time elapsed, 2 minutes, 14 seconds. He turned to face Kaido and Hana, who stood at the edge of the room, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. The main lights came back on, bright and sudden. Kaido began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clap that echoed in the massive hall. Hana simply nodded, a look of fierce, undeniable approval in her eyes. It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. The name is no longer a joke, Kaido said, his voice resonating with pride. Deku is no longer the symbol of the useless. Today, it has become the codename for a weapon. Izuku stood tall in the center of the room, surrounded by his defeated comrades. He looked down at his own gloved hands. This was what he was now, a living weapon, forged in the fires of grief and sharpened on the whetstone of revolution. And he was ready for war.